Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Christensen, and welcome to Tableau Essential Charts. Uh, I have been a Tableau trainer for 8 years, and I'm a co-founder over here at Tessellation, and I'm really excited to do my very first YouTube live. I do web chats all the time, but I'm really excited to do a live one right now. So just got a message that answered my first question, which is if people are going to be able to hear me. It sounds like you can. At any time, I'll be monitoring the chat as we go through. Please let me know if you have any questions. Put those in chat. If there's any technical issues, please address them with me as we go through. I want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible and everyone's questions are answered. All right, so we are going to get started. So with this live training, we actually have 3 live trainings going on right now on our Data Coach channel, and this is the Tableau Essential Charts. So the purpose of this training is it assumes that you are a brand new or newer Tableau user and and you want to learn what are good chart types, how do I make them, and how do I really start building my first dashboard. So that is going to be the goal today. So if you're viewing us through the Data Coach Live website for Essential Charts, and you go to the material section, there is going to be a workbook that you can use to follow along with me as we go, or you can just watch today and you can use that workbook to kind of practice some of the concepts that we talk about in the future. Before we start, though, there is one thing that I want to show the group. Some of you may not have a Tableau license. So if you are brand new, just like Seth is, he just said that in the chat, what you can do is you can go to public.tableau.com and you can download their free version of their tool. So the free version has all of the functionality that we're going to talk about today. The limitation with the free version is actually just what data source types you can connect to. But all of the examples we're going to be using today are going to use Excel as a data source, and that is one of the data source types that you can use in Tableau Public. So you can start your download. It will take a little bit to download. We won't be able to wait for everyone to be able to do that, but this is a great location where you can start your Tableau journey. And I will post that link in the chat so everyone has access to that. All right, so let's jump into the actual Tableau tool. So I am using one of the newer 2020 versions of Tableau. I think I'm using the second newest version. So if you are using an older version of Tableau, no worries. We're not going to be talking about any of the new concepts in Tableau. But you might see a slight look and feel difference in what we have here. So just keep that in mind that it might not look exactly the same. Now we're talking about versioning. The file that you download that you can follow along with is the 10.15 version, which is the version of Tableau from about 2 years ago. So if you have an older version of Tableau, as long as it's 10.5 or higher or more recent, you should be able to open this file that you can get from our website and be able to either follow along or, again, do this as practice after the fact. That, excuse me, that should be all the housekeeping items that we need to talk about before we can jump into using Tableau. So like I said at the top, what we'll be talking about today is the 10 or so charts types that I think every new analyst should learn in order to be a really successful data visualization artist. So we'll talk about things like bar charts, line charts, area charts, and then we'll get more and more complicated as we go. So how each of these sections is going to work is I'm going to start by giving kind of my training spiel on an individual chart type or concept in Tableau. Then we will jump to the practice file that everyone has access to, and we will go through that practice together. And again, I recommend that people kind of go through and on their own after the fact to make sure they read those concepts. What might be helpful is if you make a copy of that file that you downloaded, just so you have a brand new pristine version of it, and then one that you can work through today, so you don't have to worry about messing things up if you want to come back later. All right, that's all of the housekeeping. So, since a lot of you are likely brand new to Tableau, what we're going to need to talk about is how do you connect to data, and what is the tool for, and what is the layout for. So I'll go through this quickly just because we do have both people who've used it a little bit and people who are brand new. But Tableau is in itself a data visualization authoring tool. So we make visuals based off of a data source that we connect to. So the first thing you have to do, though, is connect to that data source. So how do you connect to a data source? Well, we have Tableau up on the screen. I have a new blank workbook. I can click here on Connect to Data, and I can go to any of the file types I want to connect to. So we are going to be using Microsoft Excel today, just because that's we're going to be using a sample data set that Tableau supplied that's in that format. But I do want to talk about what Tableau can connect to. Tableau can connect to any major file that was used in data analysis. So anything from Microsoft Excel to machine or web-generated JSON files, to a PDF, to spatial files, to R statistical files. But you can also connect to a server. So the server section would be connecting to a traditional like on-premise database that your company might have, or maybe that you personally have, or cloud-based systems such as Salesforce or Databricks are some kind of common examples that you might be able to connect to. But like I said, today we are going to be connecting to Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to click here on Microsoft Excel. Now, when you download Tableau, you won't need to do this for the workbook file that I provided, but it will also install on your computer the sample Superstore dataset, which is an amazing dataset to use when you're learning the tool, because it's going to have all of the things that you need to learn. You can learn by using just this dataset. So I'm going to double click here, and it's going to bring me to the data connection screen. Now, I could spend an entire 3 hours just talking about how to connect to data in Tableau. It's actually the data preparation side is kind of my passion. I like preparing data for tools like Tableau. But we'll go through this kind of quickly, because that's not the focus of today. So over on the left, we have the database or the workbook or the file that we're connected to. So we are connected to the sample Superstore dataset. Immediately below that, it's going to show all of the tabs in the case of Excel, but all of the tables that you can connect to that exist within that workbook or within that database. So I have an orders table, a people table, and a returns table. So this data set that we're using is sample data that is roughly based off of an online store like a Staples or an Office Max. So it's all going to be office supplies, technology, furniture, that sort of thing you might be able to get from those websites. So I'm going to connect to the orders table, which is just a record of every order and every item that an individual ordered from this fake website. And that's all you have to do. All you have to do is drag the table over to the white space view here, and then you have connected to your data. One thing I do like to call out, if you are new to Tableau, is that Tableau is a read-only tool, meaning that any of the changes that we make to the data here only live in Tableau. We're not actually changing the underlying data set. So most of the time, that's a good thing. There's some situations where we did want to change the underlying data source, but most of the time we want to make sure, and Tableau will, that we don't change anything in the underlying data. For example, here in the view, I can do things like rename fields, add aliases. So I'm going to change row ID to be row # for number, change data types. Again, just calling this out real quickly. Today is not a training on data source connection, but that is something you can do in Tableau. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on sheet 1 and I can start making visualizations. I'm now connected to my data source. So once you're connected, what you can do is you can start creating a visualization. And the most basic visualization that everyone needs to know how to create is a bar chart. I don't think that there's been a dashboard that I've made in the last 8 years that didn't have some version of a bar chart on it. It's kind of the staple visualization we think about when we do data and analytics. So before we get into that, though, I do want to talk about what we see here. So in the center where it says sheet 1 and we have things that say drop fields here, this is called our view. This is where our visualization will be assembled and previewed, essentially. We have our rows and our column shelf. So this is where we can put dimensions and measures, so categorical information and numerical information that'll either be arranged left to right or top to bottom. And then we have our cards over here. We won't talk about pages and filters much in this training at all, but for background information, pages is for simple animation. Filters is for filtering your data set and having that corresponding filter be in your visualization, as well as providing basic interactivity for your end user. And finally, the marks card, which we'll be doing a lot in today, which is used to change the appearance and the behavior of a mark in our visualization. So this will become more apparent in just a second, but what a mark is it is like a bar or a circle or a dot, those actual elements that are in our visualization. How do we change those elements? All right. One final thing to call out is dimensions and measures over here, because each of these behaves differently. A dimension is categorical information. So things like dates or labels or customer name, address, categorical information for the most part will be under dimensions. Measures, on the other hand, is aggregatable information, usually a number. So it would be things like sum of sales, total profit, percent discount. Those sort of things will show up under measures. So it's the combination of what we put on columns and rows, put on the marks card, and whether something is a dimension or a measure where we can make near infinite different types of visualizations, and we'll talk about the 10 most common good visualizations here today. Now that we know how to navigate, let's actually start building. So there's a couple of different ways that you can bring a visualization into your view. The first and the easiest is you can drag by clicking and drag over a dimension or measure and put it on columns or rows. So I'm going to put category here on rows. You'll see what happened as soon as I brought category out. In my view, I now have a label for the 3 categories within my data set. Now, that doesn't mean that there's 3 records in my data set. That just means that there are 3 unique categories that exist in this data set. And there's about 10,000 records in this data set, representing 10,000 items that were ordered. I can then bring out my second visualization, which is subcategory. So now I have every category and the corresponding subcategory. And there's 17 subcategories in this data set that are uniquely within a category. So I can now see a label for things like furnishings or storage or copiers or office supplies. We can see all the labels here. When you don't have a measure in your visualization, for the most part, you're going to see this label that says ABC. That really doesn't represent anything other than Tableau telling us, hey, I would really like to have some data here that I can represent as a mark. The ABC means that we don't really have any data. So how do we get that data to actually show other than the labels? We can take out a measure, and in this case, we're going to put it on the opposite shelf, onto the columns shelf. And now we have our first visualization. At the top on the toolbar where it says standard, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to switch this to be entire view, just to make it be a little bit easier to see. So this is a bar chart. The size of the bar chart represents the total sum of sales for each unique combination of category and subcategory. So here on chairs, best selling in terms of sales, I can see that I have roughly $320,000 in sales. Awesome. You now know how to make a bar chart. Let's review the steps that we've talked about so far. Oh, to clear a visualization, you can click this button with the bar chart and the X up here at the top. The steps for creating a bar chart. Put one or more dimensions on rows or columns. In this case, I'm going to put category and subcategory both on rows. Put a measure on the opposite shelf, in this case, columns. That's all you need to do to create a bar chart. Tableau actually did something behind the scenes. Tableau saw that we had two dimensions and one measure, and it correctly assumed that probably the best visualization that we could have and that we could do would be a bar chart. So we can look over here on the marks card, and on this drop down right here, it says automatic. That's the default. Whenever it says automatic, what that means is Tableau is going to make its best guess on what the mark type should be. Tableau is pretty good at making good guesses, but you can always go into here and you can force what mark type you'd like to see. And we're going to go through most of these today, not all of them, most of them. And I can say I always want this to be a bar chart. That is a good best practice once you know what visualization type you'd like. And the reason it's a good best practice is if I add something new to my visualization and it's still on automatic, it might change the visualization type. I always like to specify what mark type, what visualization type I would like. Now, this is a basic bar chart, but this wouldn't be Tableau Essential Charts if I didn't go through what are some important things you can do to make it be easier for your end users to be able to interpret your bar charts. There's actually a lot we can do. The first thing we can do is we can add a label. I'm going to add sales to color again. Sorry, not to color. I said label. I'm going to add sales to label. And now, at the end of each visualization, we have a nice little label that represents how much sales did we have. I can also format this. Almost anything in Tableau, you can right-click on it and you can select Format. And this will open up the Format pane on the left side. We won't go through every option here, but there are some things that we can do. We can change sales to show up as currency. So I'm going to go to where it says numbers, and from automatic, I'm going to change it to be currency custom. And I am going to change this to be 1 decimal point, actually 0 decimal points. Going to have the American dollar sign in front of it, and I want to display this in thousands with K. So now, this is a little bit more compact. Maybe my end users don't need to know to the dollar what these numbers represent. The next thing that I can do is I can make the text bigger. I'm going to go from size 9 to about size 12. I think that looks pretty good. A couple other formatting things that we can do. The purpose of a bar chart is to be able to compare between other bars. It's not really about comparing to the axis itself. Once we have the labels on here, the axis label is actually kind of redundant. I don't really need it anymore. So I can right click here and I can deselect show header. And then the axis will go away. This visualization is turning out pretty nice. But there's a couple more things I can do. We're kind of getting into more subjective things here, but you can probably see these light gray lines. I don't like these light gray lines. They're the default in Tableau. So I can also get rid of these. So I can right click, go to format, go to lines, and I'm going to get rid of the column grid lines. I think that this is now starting to look pretty good. The final thing I want to do with my bar chart is this is showing sum of sales. But when we are talking about sales, almost always we also want to talk about profit. Just because we are doing really well selling chairs in this data set does not mean that we're making money. So I want to add another measure to my visualization, which is profit. But instead of putting it on columns or rows, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag profit and put it on color. And what Tableau did here is it's now going to color my negative profit in some shade of orange, and then my positive profit in some shade of blue. And the closer each of those colors gets, or the lighter each of those colors gets into the point where they are gray, that's going to be our 0 mark. So I can see here that even though we have some pretty good sales in tables, I'm not making any money. I'm actually losing a lot of money on tables. I also want to add a label for profit. So what I'm going to do over here on measures is I'm going to add profit to label just like I did with sales. And I'm going to do a couple things real quickly. First, like we did before, I'm going to right click and go to format. I'm going to change this font to be, I'm going to change the format to be currency, and then get rid of those decimal points. I'm not going to do a do a K here because some of my profit is really small. Finally, I want to make it clear which number is sales and which number is profit. So I can do some editing. I can go into labels, and then I can click here on the ellipses, and I'm going to add a label for sales, make that text for sales a little bit bigger because that's most important, and then I'm going to add a label for profit and have that remain just a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to resize my view so we can see everything. And there is how you make a pretty darn good bar chart. I am going to pause here briefly for questions, and we'll see how this works with questions with chat. And there's also a slight delay. I'm about 30 seconds ahead of y'all. So let me know if you have any questions. And going forward, please put the questions in the chat as we go through. Also, I'll say this a couple times, we're a new YouTube channel. We would really appreciate subscribes and likes. That really helps us from an advertisement perspective. All right, let's do our first practice. So if you're following along, I went through a lot of formatting options, but we're going to keep it simple for our practice. So I'm going to go into the workbook that everyone should have, and we're going to start with practice bar. So in this practice workbook, we have about 14 or 15 simple practice examples. They get a little bit harder as they go, but it's pretty good for giving step-by-step instructions on what to do. So you'll start with practice, and then you will move to solutions with the actual bar chart. And you can compare what you created under practice to what we have here in solutions. Oh, I got a good question that just came up, which was, can you change the colors by bar? So that's a really good question. So how colors behave in Tableau depends on if there is a measure or there's a dimension on colors. So I added a measure to colors, which was on on profit. So what Tableau did was it automatically had a range of colors, and Tableau's default is orange to blue. The reason that's Tableau's default is that's the most accessible color scheme. If the most common type of color blindness is red-green color blindness, so Tableau uses a lot of oranges, blues, and grays in their default color palettes. So with this, and I'll get to your question in a second specifically, but if you go into color and click edit colors, you can change these what are called diverging palettes, and I can change what I want this to go to. But the question in the chat was, can we change colors by bar? Yes, you can color by other fields. So I'm going to take sum of profit off of that color, and in this case, I'm going to add category to color. So now I'm coloring by the 3 categories in my data set. I could also, to specifically color by bar, I could add subcategory to color, and now I have a different color per bar. I don't think this is a best practice. I don't like having more than 4 or 5 different colors in my visualization, but it is an option that I do see from time to time. So I'm going to go back to profit here. Great question so far. All right, the next question that came through was, I noticed that sales and profit labels disappeared from the top bar and reappeared. Was that due to the screen refresh, or did I do something? It was actually due to available space on my monitor and in the view itself. So what it looked like before was, I'm going to go back to when it wasn't working, is now I see that there's only a couple labels roughly every other. So what Tableau does by default is it only puts a label where there's enough room, and you can actually override this functionality. So I can go to label, and I can say allow mark labels to overlap, but that's not a best practice. What I did real quickly is I switched my view from standard to fit width, which will add a scroll bar if needed. And then I just use my cursor to resize to give a little bit more room for the labels. Excellent question, Andrew. The next question I saw is, why don't we drag the fields directly onto the chart instead of rows and columns? Thank you. Honestly, it's personal preference. There's no right way of doing it. The nice thing about Tableau is there's always 2, 3, maybe 4 ways to do absolutely everything. The reason I drag things to rows is just that's how I learned how to do it, and that's how I just start teaching people. It's no better to do it one way or the other. Other ways are you can actually double click on fields, and that will add it to your visualization. All right, I'm almost caught up in questions. Next question is, how do I create a Sankey chart without having to use a union in the database? Now that's an advanced question. If you're at the point where you're making Sankey charts, I recommend you jump onto the other more advanced Tableau Live session that's going on right now. I don't think he's covering Sankey charts right now, but that can be Luke is going to be covering more advanced charts. The simple question to your answer is, it is a process called data densification, which we will not get into right here, but hopefully just searching Sankey Tableau data densification will be enough information for you to find the right information to create a Sankey chart without having to do a union in a database. That said, Tableau is not the best tool at making Sankeys. It's always a little bit hacky. All right, excellent questions so far. The questions are my favorite part about Data Coach. trainings. All right, going back to our practice problem on making a bar chart. So I'm going to go a little bit slower here than I've been going so far in case you are following along. So the bar chart we want to have has segment and category, and we're showing sum of sales, and we're coloring by profit. So in here, what I can do is go over here to the left, and you'll notice that I've added some folders here and some hierarchies just to make it a little bit easier to find your information. But I can go in here and I can drag out category. I'm going to put it on columns. And I'm going to drag out segment and put it on rows. Let's say you can't find something. You can click right here and you'll be able on the magnifying glass, and you will be able to search for a specific field. Now we're going to add sales to columns and add it to the right of category. I'm now going to go to the top view, and this isn't in the instructions, but I'm going to change this to be entire view just to make it easier to see. I'm going to drag profit to colors, and then I'm going to click on color on my marks card, go to edit, and then I can change this to be orange, blue, white diverging, and I now have my final visualization. All right, that is bar charts, which is the fundamentals of most visualizations. Most visualizations will have a bar chart, by far the most common visualization that we make. But now we are going to move into another common visualization, which is a text table. And I'm going to show the group how to make text tables and then show you how to make other visualizations that are based off of the text table. So going back to my workbook where I'm just going to show you some examples. Let's make a text table. So to make a text table, the easiest thing you can do is just drag something like sales, so a measure, and put it on text. And right away, we have the total sales written out, which is about 2.3 million. What we can do then, like we saw before, is change the mark type, which is on automatic and text right now, which is great. We just want to make sure that that is. And this is a text table. I now have one record for each of the 51 states in this data set. So District of Columbia does have its own record. Usually with text tables, you also add a second dimension or more to the opposite shelf. In this case, columns. Oh, I did not want to do region. That was not a good example. I wanted to do order date. So drag another dimension to the opposite shelf. So now I can see every state, every year in my data set, and then I have text for the total sales in that state for that year. So I'm going to do some formatting things just to make this be a little bit easier to read. I'm going to switch the width to be fits to width, which gives me a scroll bar. I'm going to right click, go to format like we did before, and then I'm going to make the headers be a little bit bigger, and then right click, format, and then I'm going to actually go into here to text, and I'm going to make sum of sales a little bit bigger too. So hopefully that's easier for everyone to see. You don't need to do that on your side. I just need to make sure that everything's large enough so people are able to see. All right. So this is a text table. We're going to talk more about this in a second, but I had a couple of questions come in. I'll take a second to answer those questions. So we got a question that says, does floating tile make dashboard performance slow as compared to fixed dashboard size? So that is another advanced question. We will talk a little bit about dashboards here at the end if we have time. The short answer for that is it really has more to do with the size of the dashboard than whether you're using floating or fixed on the dashboard. So not using automatic size on your dashboard is the best thing to do in order to get good performance. That's a side note. The group doesn't need to know about that. I had another question saying, I'm not able to see clearly on the screen. Can I do something to clear that up? Let me know if anyone else is having trouble seeing the screen. I have it pulled up on my side for what the group is seeing, and it looks pretty clear to me, but I'm happy to look at settings if multiple people are having that issue. And then I got a question from Mary saying, is there a way to automatically format it as currency? I love that question. I'm going to show the group how to do that right now. So I'm going to take sum of sales off of my visualization. So the question was, hey, is there a way that we can make a currency always show up as currency? And yes, you can do that. And that is called a default property. So I can right click on sales and I can go to default properties, and then from here I can go to number format, and a very similar screen will show up. And here I can click on currency and I'm going to hit OK. Nothing's changed in my visualization yet, but if I bring out sales going forward, because I did this via a right click, anytime sales is now added to my visualization, it will be formatted with as a currency. Great question, Mary. All right. This always begs the question, is this a good visualization? Yes and no. People are used to reading data in spreadsheet form in tables, but it's not really a visualization. It's more of a matrix. So when we have visualizations like this, it's always important to remember that these need to be used at the right time. So I always put a crosstab tables like this towards the end of my visualization in order to make sure that we're looking at the visuals first, and then we use this for the needed detailed information later on. But I do like to call these out earlier because these are great. A crosstab is a great base for other visualizations. And we'll talk about two of those visualizations, highlight tables and heat maps, later today. So be careful about when you use these, but it is important to know how to create these. So I'm now going to go slower and jump to our practice exercise. So I'm now on practice text table. I'm going to add category and subcategory to rows. I'm going to double click on profit this time to add it to my view. And then I'm also going to double click on sales to add it to my view. This double clicking added things to the text box automatically. It's a nice little shortcut. When you have two measures in your view, and when I double clicked on them, what Tableau did is it added this new shelf over here that we haven't seen before called measure values. And then it added a new pill called measure names. Measure names is just the labels for profit and sales or any other measure that we have in our visualization. And then over here in measure values, we can use this pane to do things like reorder or even add additional metrics to our visualization. It's a nice handy little thing to add additional measures to our bar charts, to our text tables and some other visualizations. All right. let's talk about our next visualization, which is based off of our crosstab text table right here. And that visualization is make sure I'm going in the right order, is a highlight table. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of creating this visualization from scratch again, because the first steps are the same, I'm going to right click on my tab at the bottom, and I'm going to say duplicate. And I now have crosstabs too, which I can use to be the basis for my highlight table. I'm going to name this highlight. All right. So from here, all I need to do to create a highlight table is two things. I can add another measure, or really the same measure if I want to color. And then I'm going to change the mark type from automatic text to be a square. This is a highlight table. This tends to be a better way of using tables in your visualizations to quickly show information. So like we had with the bar chart, the color, the diverging orange to blue, is based off of profit, but then we can see the actual sales information. Actually, to make this even better, I'm going to use the same metric, both profit on text and sum of profit on color. And to do that, what I did was I just dragged over profit, put it on top of sales on my marks card, and it changed to profit, and do some formatting to make this be a currency. So the reason this is a little bit better in most but not all cases is your eye as a user should be drawn to the darkest orange or the darkest blue. And overall, you're probably going to be drawn more to the orange than the blue. So this helps you find where are the things that are going really well and where are the problem areas. So I can see down here in North Carolina, I lost a lot of money in 2019. I lost $5,000. And then in Texas, I can see I haven't been doing well for a couple of years now. So this is a good way of making people's eyes go exactly where you want it to go in order to call out things that are really good or things that are unusually bad. There's actually a small thing that we should change here. I'm going to take a quick second to take a drink of water. There's something we should change here. As you know, each state has significantly different populations. So this might be an okay visualization, but if I'm comparing states, comparing North Dakota to California, maybe not the best way of doing this. And that's because I'm doing a total aggregate sum. You can change the aggregation in Tableau. Sum is the default, but I can change the aggregation. So what I can do here is I can right-click on sum of profit on my marks card for text, go to measure, and I can change this to be an average. I can also and should also do this on sum profit on color, change this to be an average. So now I have a different visualization that is showing the average profit that I'm making per item sold in my orders. So telling a very different story here. This is a highlight table. All right, so let's go back to our practice. Oh, a question just came in. So I got a question saying, can I share some knowledge about dashboard extension objects? Unfortunately, we will not get to that today. There is a more advanced Tableau training going on by Data Coach on our YouTube channel right now. I would recommend jumping over to that channel if you have a more advanced question like that. That's going to be a better audience for you, I would assume. Thanks for the question, though. Keep them coming. All right, jumping into our practice for highlight tables. Again, I'll go a little bit more slowly here. Add category to rows and add subcategory to rows. Add region to columns. Add profit to text. Another copy of profit to color. And change the mark type to square. That's how you create a highlight table. I'll do that one more time. Category and subcategory to rows. Region to columns. Profit to text. Profit to color. And finally, change the mark type to be a square. You now know how to make a highlight table. So there's a second common visualization that is based off of a text table, and this is called a heat map. It's not a geographic map, but we still call it a heat map. So like before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the crosstab that we created before and use this as a base by selecting Duplicate. Here, I'm going to name this Heat Map. So while a highlight table was really good at showing visually one metric, in this case profit, what a heat map is good at doing is visually showing two metrics, and we're going to show profit and sales here again today. So to do this, the first thing we want to do is keep sum of sales here, but I actually want to change how this is behaving. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the mark type from automatic text to a circle. You can use a circle or a square. And we actually don't want sales to be the label anymore. We want this to be the size of the circle. So what I could do is I could just take sales off and re-add sales to size. But a nice little trick is anything on your marks card, I can click on that icon. So I have the text icon right here. I can click on this and I can change this from text to size. And now it's sizing my mark based off of the size of sales. Now I'm going to make my each row be a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to click on sales and I'm going to make the circles a little bit bigger too, a little bit easier to see. Heat maps usually have two different measures. You can do it with one, but usually you do it with two. So I'm going to add profit to color as well. And now we have a visualization with two visual cues. The size of the mark represents the total amount of sales, and the color of the mark represents the profit. This is one of my favorite ways of showing very, very quickly how well two combinations of dimensions are doing. You can also have a heat map with a square. It's just personal preference. It doesn't have to be circle. I'd say circle is just a little bit more common than square. All right, so how do we make this visualization in our practice problem? Well, I'll go through this slowly like before. Oh, I accidentally had the caption at the bottom, moving that to the top. So add category and subcategory to rows. You'll notice as we go through this that a lot of the steps are going to be exactly the same. There's just small changes on the marks card to make different visuals. So category and subcategory to rows. Region to columns. Profit to color. Sales to size. And then change the mark type to either be a square or a circle. And then you can do some formatting to make things easier to see for your end user. All right. These are our 3 table-based visualizations. A text table, a highlight table, and a heat map. Some really good visualizations you can now add to your repertoire. All right, so we have been going for about an hour now. We are going to take a short 2-minute break and get back into some more visualization types. I really hope everyone stays with me as we go through. I've been really enjoying these questions so far. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break. We'll get started in 2 minutes. Thanks, everyone. All right, so a couple questions came in during the break. Can you combine multiple dimensions to make a measure? So I might need you to elaborate a little bit on that question, Seth, but I think I understand what you're asking. The most common way to do that would be to count a dimension. So you can do that, and that uses what's called a calculated field, which we're not going to talk about today. But I would be able to, say, count the number of states that are in my data set, or count the number of states within a specific segment. That is something you can do, but we won't cover today. So Amelia asked, where is the workbook? So I'll resend the link to that. So I put that in the chat. So it's out. You might be watching this on our website, or you might be watching this on YouTube. So if you go to the website link I just provided, you can click on that link if you're not already there, and you can click on the materials tab, and there will be a download that you can use in order to see the workbook and follow along. So there's a question that Victor said in the previous example exercise, we picked the square shape, but got a highlight table, not a heat map. Why was that? That's an excellent question and observation. The reason for that was, it was something like this. Until you add a measure, so I just took sales off of size. So you will have a highlight table until you add a measure to size. And that is the specific step that changes something from a highlight table to a heat map. Great question. All right. Awesome questions, everyone. So we are now going to be talking about, and this is roughly going in order of how popular these these visualization types are. We're now going to be talking about line charts and area charts. These are the two most common charts that we do to show a trend over time. That's what a line chart is really for. So to do this, what we're going to do is I am going to start by adding a date field, and I know this is a date because I have the nice little calendar symbol. It also says date. I'm going to add this to columns. Then I'm going to add a measure like sales to rows. This isn't a very interesting line chart, but this is a line chart. It shows a trend over the 4 years in my data set. One side note about dates is it's really nice because dates have a built-in hierarchy. I can expand dates right here, and then I can now show year and quarter. So now I have each of the quarters within my years, and I can see the trend there. The downside of doing this is I don't have a continuous line, and I'll get to that in a second. But I can see how it changed within each of the years, the quarters. One really cool thing I can do is I can reorder dimensions on the column shelf. This is actually probably a more interesting visualization. I am now showing within each quarter, how did things progress across the year? And then I can continue to expand things in my visualization. Usually, though, I just took date off of columns, which is why we have just a big blob right now. Usually with dates, though, we want to show a continuous line. How do I show a continuous line in Tableau? I can right-click on the date field when it's on columns or rows, and I have two sections that I really wish were labeled better in Tableau. But this first section has year, quarter, month, and day. These are discrete labels, so that would show like the quarter label that we had before. The section underneath will create a nice continuous line. You can tell the difference because I have a label here with May. It's just May. There's going to be other Mays. That's just a label. But down here, I have a specific May that only happened once, May 2015. I can use this to determine, to change this to a continuous line. So I'm going to click here, and I now have a nice continuous line. So I can now see the ups and downs of my visualization, as well as the seasonality. It's kind of the same thing, really. But I can see, for the most part, I do pretty poorly in right after Christmas. This is a U.S. data set from January to February, and I steadily go up through the year and then back down again in January. But I can see overall there's been a slight trend. So let's go through these steps again real quick. Add a measure to rows. Add a date to columns. And then if I want discrete labels, which is fine, I select from the first section with the date types. If I want more continuous ones, I go to the second section. Both are valid, but I'd say a continuous line chart is more common. I'm going to switch that to month. All right, let's talk about some formatting options that you can do here. First things first, I can add a label on sum of sales. So I'm going to add that to label, and it's going to label every single mark. This is a little too much. But what I can do, though, is I can go into label and on the marks card. So I clicked on label on the marks card. And on the marks label, I have a couple of options. I could say selected, highlighted, min, max, line ends. I'm going to show a couple of these. I think the most common here is min and max. So when I've selected that, it's going to show a label only for the lowest point and the highest point in the data set. Another common option would be line ends, the beginning and the end. Probably not as important here when we have so much seasonality. But you can also do highlighted. I like highlighted because it will only show on a selected mark. So it's nice little, and let me turn that tooltip off because it was kind of in the way. You get nice little labels when you select a mark or multiple marks. Let's create another, let's improve this visualization a little bit. So it's obvious to me, but I look at visualizations like this all day, that there is a slight upward trend. But let's say I wanted to confirm that. I can go from the data pane to the analytics pane, and I can drag out a trend line and put it in my view. And we won't get into today, but linear trend is the most common trend. And we can now see that we do have an upward trend. Mary had the question of, generally I'm not a fan of the grid lines. Is there a way to set it up to never draw them? Or do we have to unformat them in every view? Thank you, Mary. That is my biggest complaint about Tableau as well. For the most part, you do have to get rid of them. So I don't like them in this visualization either. So to review how to get rid of them, you right click, go to format, and click on the lines. And here, those lines that I specifically don't like is the grid line, and I can get rid of that. I really don't like them either. There are some tricks that you can do, like copying and pasting and templating out visualizations beforehand, but I can't think of a way that is perfect for making sure that we never have those grid lines. But I agree, I don't like them either. All right, so here is our bar chart. One thing that you've noticed so far is we only have one line. We could add additional lines to our visualization if we'd like. And actually, I'm going to get rid of the trend line for this just by dragging it off. I can add, say, category. Remember, there's 3 categories. I'm going to put this on color. And all of a sudden, I now have 3 different lines for each of the categories. Is this an easy visualization to read? No. By no means is this an easy visualization. But this is a good transition into our next visualization type, which is an area chart. So I can go into the marks card, which is automatic for a line right now. Whenever I have a continuous and sometimes non-continuous date, Tableau is going to recognize that probably should be a line. But here I'm going to change it to be an area chart. And this visualization is a little bit easier to read. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit easier to read. So now I have blue for furniture, orange for office supplies, and red for technology. There's a big caveat here, though. Actually, I'm going to switch this to be quarters just for now to make it be a little bit easier to see. Is people sometimes interpret area charts wrong. So the top section here is blue for furniture. So if I'm going across, I could see here in In 2016 in Q4, I might interpret this as, oh, that's furniture. They're at about 200,000 within that quarter. That's actually not true. An area chart, the bottom section, the top of that, I'm going to turn tooltips back on. I actually need them here. The top section is going to show you, is going to correspond on the axis to how much that was. So about 63,000 for technology. But where the orange part is right here, just over 100,000, that represents technology plus office supplies. And where furniture is, it is furniture plus office supplies plus technology on that axis. So particularly for area charts, I do think it's important to do a little training with your end users to make sure they are interpreting them correctly. These are good visualizations for showing the percent of whole. You can actually do some cool things with this to edit this to show some percent of whole visualizations. We won't get into this in a lot of detail right now, but this is a good base for a lot of other visualizations. So what I mean by that is, and I was doing that on the wrong pill. So I could go right-click sum of sales, and I can say things like I want this to be the percent of total, and then now I have a percentage, and then I can do some formatting here. And this axis in my mind is a little bit clearer, so I can see what the overall percentage going across was. Anyway, I'm actually getting down a rabbit hole. I probably shouldn't have introduced that, but this is an area chart. All right, going back to we have two practices to do right here, and I'll go a little bit more slowly for these practices. All right, so we're gonna make a line chart. I'm gonna add ship date and put it on columns. In this case, I'm not going to change anything about the labels or the axis. I'm going to add quantity to rows. I'm going to add region from dimensions to color. And then I'm also going to add regions to label. And then I can add a label. But what I'm going to do here is label the line ends and disable allow labels to overlap. So now I have labels at the beginning and the end. I'll do that again. Add ship date to columns. In this case, I'm not going to change anything. Quantity to rows. Region to color. And region to labels. Oops, I accidentally added that to path, something we're not using. And then I can format where I'd like the labels to show. I'll do selected this time. I like selected. We see a big dive here. This data set has 2019 information. You can right click on 2019 and just say exclude. Since that was an incomplete year there, this is a little bit easier to read and the labels will show up a little bit better here. All right, let's move on to creating an area chart. So it can be very, very similar. The exact same steps to start. I'm going to add ship date to columns, quantity to rows, region to color, region to label. I don't have this in here, but I am going to exclude 2019. Same steps as before. The final step is you change the mark type from a line to an area. All right. These are our two line chart visualizations. Very, very common. Actually, we have a third one later on that we might get to if we have some time. All right. Our next visualization type is a scatter plot. Let me know real quick if you have any questions on line charts before we get into scatter plots, because we're going to kind of shift the types of visualizations a little bit with the scatter plot. Okay, so what is a scatter plot? A scatter plot is used for comparing two measures. So far, all of our visualization types have been comparing a dimension with a measure in some different way. But we use a scatter plot in order to compare two different measures. Now, everyone's probably been exposed to scatter plots before, but it might have been a while. Maybe it was the last time you had that was in high school or college statistics. So to create a scatter plot, what you can do is you can double click on two measures. And I'm going to double click on sales and profit. And this actually makes a scatter plot. It's not a super interesting scatter plot because it just compares the total sum of sales with the total sum of profit. Not real interesting so far. Why is there only one mark returning? Well, there's only one mark returning because I'm comparing the total aggregate of sales in my data set to the total aggregate of profit in my data set, which will give us only one mark. I'm actually going to change the mark types from shape to a larger circle. Hopefully be a little bit easier for you all to see. So Tableau likes, and we've seen this before, but Tableau likes to aggregate data. It likes to sum things, it likes to average things. And when we do a scatter plot, we have to tell Tableau how do we want to aggregate, or probably more accurately, how do we want to disaggregate our data? Well, we can completely disaggregate our data. So if we go to analysis at the top, you'll see that the default option is to aggregate your data. So I can deselect aggregate measures, and what that's going to do is it's going to add one mark for every row in my data set. Now let's do some quick formatting things here. I'm actually going to make the size a little bit smaller again. I'm going to go to color, change the opacity to make it semi-transparent, and then add a border. This isn't a perfect visualization, but we'll get into that more later. This is one option. This is not a best practice, though. For a data set that has 10,000 records, Tableau is going to be able to put 10,000 marks on a scatter plot pretty easily. However, you might crash your Tableau instance if you don't have a powerful enough graphics card if you're saying in 100,000 or a million or a billion row data set, which are things that I have seen in Tableau before. So it isn't a great idea on large or even medium data sets to deselect aggregate measures from the analysis menu. So what are your options instead? Well, your options instead are to use the marks card. So when you add a dimension to the marks card and you add it anywhere with the exception of tooltip, it will change how you aggregate your visualization. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to add category to detail. All of a sudden, I go from having one visualization to having three visualizations. I now have three visualizations here because I have three categories in my data set. This would also work if I put category on color. I have this same three dots in my visualization, but this time I'm now coloring by each of the three categories. I'm now going to add subcategory to detail. And I now have 17 marks in my visualization. And the reason I have 17 marks on this scatter plot visualization is because I have 17 combinations of category and subcategory in this data set. Finally, I am going to add customer name, and I'm going to add that to label. So I now have one record for every customer who ordered something within a category and subcategory combination. You'll notice, like before with the question that we got, Tableau is only going to put a label where there is enough room. If I click here on label, I can select allow labels to overlap, but as you can see here, that is not a good visualization. I have about 6,000 marks right here. It's not a good visualization. Actually, in fact, I don't like labels on the marks at all. So I'm going to click here on the T for label and switch that to detail. So I still have a mark for each combination of customer, category, and subcategory, but now it is a lot cleaner and I can see that information from the tooltip. You can swap axes. So at the top, there is this swap tool, and you can swap sum and sales between rows and columns. This actually works with any visualization type. But it comes up a lot when we're talking about scatter plots, as we're going to want to have our dependent variable and independent variables on the right axes. Like we saw with the line charts, we can add a trend line to scatter plots. Since we have color by category, it's going to add 3 lines, one for each color. This is our scatter plot. All right, let's go to our practice problem if you're following along. Again, if you joined late, a couple quick things that I'm going to mention as we go through. You can follow along with the practice problems, or they're designed to be able to work through on your own afterwards. We're a newer YouTube channel. We always appreciate subscribes and likes. And yeah, we're going to be doing more and more of these in the future, and we hope to see everyone. All right, let's make a scatter plot. We are going to add discount to columns and profit ratio to rows. I'm going to add customer name to detail, and that gives me 1 mark per customer. It's a little bigger. I'm going to change the mark type to a circle. I'm going to change on color, change the opacity to about 50%. And I'm going to add, I like adding a border. The author of this one doesn't like borders. I think you actually personally need a light gray border whenever things are overlapping. But if you're following the directions to the T, we don't have a border. And then I'm going to make the dots slightly bigger. Let's do that one more time. Discount to columns. Profit ratio to rows. Customer name to detail. Change the mark type to circle. I actually missed a step. Sales to size. Go into color. Change the opacity to be about 50%. It doesn't have to be exact. And then resize the visualization. There is a scatter plot. All right, let's move into our next visualization type, which is a map. I really like maps. I really like spatial analysis, and there's a lot that we can talk about with maps. So back into my workbook, and we're going to create some maps. There are two main types of maps that you can create. Oh, just saw a question that came in and says, what about the ag function? What is that about? So good eye, Victor. So Victor saw the AGG function here on profit ratio. AGG is a generic function that stands for aggregate. So what that means is there's some sort of aggregate that exists with this calculation. And I'm saying calculation because profit ratio was not a default measure that was in our data set. We had to write this. And we're not going to talk about calculations in depth today, but if I go in here, oops, wrong button there, Control plus. When we go in here, I wrote this calculation. So it's the sum of profit divided by the sum of sales. So if in a calculation we have two aggregates or combinations of aggregates, it will show up in the visualization as AGG. So this just means that in some place there's an aggregate, but we can't show which one it is here. You're going to have to go back to the calculation and see. Excellent question, Victor. All right, moving on to maps. So a little background information. So this data set does not have latitude and longitude in it. What it does have, though, are city names, state names. So what I can do is over here, I have a special data type symbol of the globe icon. This means this is something that Tableau can map. So if I right click on any field and I go to geographic role, these are all of the geographic roles that Tableau can map automatically. So I just have to have the name of the thing. I don't have to have the latitude and longitude within the data set. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click on city. And this will take a second. As a side note, maps are an online thing, so you have to have an internet connection to get the maps in. You can go to the map drop down at the top, and there's actually an offline map that you can select. Here, background maps offline. If you're not online, it's not as detailed as this map. So this is showing all of the cities within this data set. Awesome. There's an issue though. In the bottom right corner, it says 353 unknowns. What's this about? Well, this is because there's a large number of cities that Tableau sees as ambiguous. And the most common stereotypical example is down here, which is Springfield. Almost every state has a city named Springfield. So the reason that there's some unknowns is because these are the states, the city names that are unique, but city names don't have to be unique from state to state. So what I need to do in order to fix this issue is add state to detail. Now Tableau knows the city and the state. Just like we saw with the heat map table visualization, this is a heat map geographic map. We can do the same sort of things that we did before. I'm going to add sales to size and profit to color. I'm going to make the size be a little bit bigger. And since we have overlapping marks, for sure change the opacity to be somewhere between like 50 and 80%. And my personal preference with overlapping marks and only with overlapping marks is to add a medium gray border. There is a second map type that's called a filled map. So for some but not all of our geographic things, state being one of them, I can double click on state, and on my marks card I can switch this to be map for filled map. This is going to draw the actual polygons on my map. This won't work for, say, city. because Tableau doesn't have the polygon information for every city, but it does for states and it does for countries, and I believe it also does for congressional districts, but I don't have congressional district in this data set. Now, this isn't a great visualization, just coloring by each state. This reminds me of a wall in an elementary school, but maybe I would want to color by region. That might be a more insightful visualization. Maybe I have a sales rep that covers each of these, a separate sales rep that covers each of these 4 regions. I can now see that in my visualization. I could do an entire 3 hours, just like on data prep. I could do an entire 3 hours on maps. But I'll just do a couple of quick things. You can search for any location on a map. I'm going to search for St. Paul, Minnesota. And then you get, it's kind of hard to see here, but you get the actual layout of the city. Believe it or not, I am right here, giving the training from right above, right before this fork in the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers. But you can do some things here that are kind of cool. So you can go to map options, and you can go to map layers, and you can change some things about the map layers. First thing is you can change the style. I personally like the dark style. I think it's easier to read. And then you can add things to the layers. So let's say I wanted to add highways. I can click here on streets, highways, and routes, and I now have a map that has that information. It's kind of hard to see, but I do have a mark right here for St. Paul and a mark up here for a St. Paul suburb called Roseville. So as I zoom out, though, you'll notice that the level of granularity on the map changes. So I now don't see the neighborhood maps, I just see the highways and the interstates. Keep going out, and eventually I'm only going to see the interstates, and then eventually I don't see any roads at all. So the level of zoom on your map affects if this layer is going to show, and you know if a layer is going to show or not because it is going to be grayed out and unselectable if you can't show it at this level. And then I can unselect this pin to go back to my original view on the map. One side note on maps, that's a common question that I get, is with a map, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be the things that Tableau can recognize automatically. You can really map anything, but the things that Tableau recognizes automatically are the only things that you can map without having latitude and longitude in your data set. Otherwise, that has to be added to your data set. So that's why this says latitude generated and longitude generated. That means that Tableau is figuring out the latitude and longitude itself. If you have a latitude and longitude in your data set, you'll be able to add it automatically within your data set and map really anything that has latitude and longitude. All right, let's pause here for some questions about maps before we move on. All right, no questions so far about maps. I'll come back to them if anyone thinks of a question as we go through. So let's jump to our practice on maps. So I'll go slowly like we have with the previous examples. I'm going to double click on state to add it to the view, and note that longitude and latitude generated are now on my columns and rows. I'm going to double click on city to also add city and state to my visualization. Because I did it in this order, with state at the higher level first and city second, I didn't get that unknown error that we saw before. I'm going to add sales, add it to size, profit, add it to color, make sure my mark type is circle. I'm going to increase the size, and then I'm going to change the opacity to about 50% and add a medium gray border. Awesome. All right. We're now going to move into some visualizations that show the percent of whole. There are a couple of good visualizations to do this. And the first one is called a tree map. You might not be familiar with a tree map. It's actually, believe it or not, you don't think about this. People just sit around and try to invent new visualization types. This is a more recent invention within the last 15 years of it being widely used. But what a tree map is good for is showing a percent of whole. So we're going to use that in our visualizations, and it'll come apparent to what I mean in just a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm not actually going to add anything to columns and rows this time, but I'm going to put category on color, and then I'm going to put sales on size. That's all you need to do to create a tree map. That's all of the steps. There's going to be some formatting things we do to make it be readable, but that's all the tree map is. And it's kind of hard to tell, but the size of these boxes represents the size, the proportion of sales within our data set. They're roughly even, but technology is a little bit bigger than office supplies and furniture. But to make this be a little bit better, we should be adding labels. I'm also going to add, actually make this be the entire view, I'm also going to add category, which is on size, and add that to label. And then I'm going to add sales, which I'm sizing by, to label as well. So now I can see that technology has about 836,000, office supplies is about 719,000, and furniture is about 741,000. Awesome. We can see the proportion. What would be helpful, though, with a proportion is the percent, showing the percent of whole. So on the label, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on sum of sales, and I'm going to go down here to what's called a quick table calculation. We're not going to talk a lot about the theory behind quick table calculations today, they're actually talking about advanced table calculations in the other YouTube live channel that's going on right now with Tableau from Data Coach. But basically what this is Tableau will do complicated calculations for us. Difficult, complicated calculations. One of them is a percent of whole. So again, right click on the sum sales label, go to quick table calculation, and great question, Mary, I'll get to that in a second. And I can say percent of total. Now I can see that it's showing that it's about 36%, 31%, and 32% for each of these categories. I'm going to do some formatting to make that be a little bit easier for you to see. Make that number larger. Oops, I did that in the wrong spot. It's not in the formatting menu, it's under labels. And then I'm going to make the label be a little bit bigger. Now, what I can also do is add another copy of sum sales to label, and now I have the actual value as well. All right, so Mary had the question, is a tree map a replacement for a pie chart? Yes, 100% yes. Tree maps and pie charts are the two most common ways of showing percent of whole. I will teach the group how to do pie charts in a little bit as one of the examples, but really you can use either. But the general recommendation is a pie chart is good at showing the difference between 2 or 3 values. So I'm just going to quickly change this to be a pie chart. 3 values is okay for a pie chart. Oh, as a side note, there's a show me button, which is a shortcut button. I don't recommend people who are learning Tableau for the first time to use shortcuts. You should build things from scratch to actually learn what things are going on. But anyway, pie charts are good for comparing 2 things or 3 things. Tree maps are better at comparing more things. And the reason for that is a tree map by default takes up the entire view. So what I have here for visualization, this would have been fine as a pie chart. But what I'm going to do that I didn't do before is I'm going to add subcategory to labels as well. This is something you couldn't do in a pie chart. I can further segment these areas, these slices, and I further segmented them by subcategory. So now the red area represents the total proportion for technology, but I now have sub-rectangles and squares within that, which will show the proportion for the subcategories within each of those categories. And just to do my due diligence, I'm going to go in and just put subcategory underneath category. I'm now pretty happy with this visualization. I'm going to name this tree map. Okay, so let's go to our practice problem for tree maps. Oh, I should talk about why is this called a tree map? Well, it's called a tree map because the person who invented these thought that the visualization kind of looked like you were looking at an orchard from an airplane. Just a fun little fact about tree maps. Let's create them in our practice problem. So I'm going to go to practice, tree map, and I'll go a little bit more slowly here. So Mary had a great question. I'm going to jump back for that. So Mary's question was, is that percentage here in the box represented for the percent of of technology as a whole or the percent of phones? It is now the percent and the total dollar amount for each of those categories. So for phones, there is a way that we could show the percentage of the technology, but that uses something that's called a level of detail calculation, which is a pretty advanced topic that we won't have time to get into today. But yes, this now the 14.37% represents the percentage for phones within technology, not the percentage for technology as a whole, but there are ways that we could do either. Great question. All right. So let's move back to our practice. I'm going to add category to detail on the marks card. Remember, with a tree map, we don't put anything on columns or rows. I'm going to also add subcategory to detail. I'm going to add quantity to size. I'm going to add subcategory to label, category to color, and also add quantity to label. Mary just qualified her question, and it is another really good question. I didn't answer the right question. So is the 14% in technology or 14% in all of sales? Let's jump back and answer that question, because that is also a really, really good question. It is 14% in all sales here. So if we took all of these percentages that we had, it would add up to be 100%. Like what I was talking about before when I misunderstood your question, sorry, is you can actually, with some more complicated calculated fields, we could change this to be the percentage of just this subcategory square, the percentage within technology, or the percentage within the whole. Actually, that's a pretty easy change. If I could right click here on the label, and there's a menu right here where I could change things around. Actually, we would need this menu. I won't get into detail, but you could go to edit the table calculation, and here you'd be able to edit it in order to get it to be the percentage within the subcategories. Again, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but that's a very good question, Mary. It is showing 14% of the whole, not 14% of technology. All right, let's go back to this practice. Let's do it one more time. Category to detail, subcategory to detail, quantity to size, category to color, subcategory to label, quantity to label. We now have a tree map. All right, the next visualization type we're going to talk about is a common visualization type, which is called a packed bubble chart. Use packed bubble charts sparingly. I think there are sometimes they're good, but I prefer tree maps. So like we saw with some of the previous visualizations, to make a packed bubble chart, it's almost exactly the same as a tree map. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with a tree map, and I'm just going to duplicate the tree map and call it packed bubble chart. The final step for a tree map is you change the mark type from a square to a circle. And now you have a packed bubble chart. So why do I prefer tree maps over packed bubble charts? I actually think a packed bubble chart is aesthetically nicer to look at. I actually think it's a prettier visualization. But the issue is that a packed bubble chart doesn't use up the entire space. So labels much more quickly on a packed bubble chart, you're not going to have enough room for those labels. Granted, we did have the same problem with a tree map. Eventually, the labels didn't have enough room, but we ran into that much later. We have less marks here that there's enough room for a packed bubble chart. But again, create a tree map, and the final step is just to change the mark type from square to a circle, and you have a packed bubble chart. Another common visualization that's like this is a word cloud. Only use word clouds if you're doing actual analysis of words, so like natural language processing. But you can do the exact same thing, but instead of changing it to square or circle, you change it to text. This isn't a good example of a word cloud, but it's another visualization that you can make in Tableau. All right, let's make this in our practice problem. It's going to seem very similar to a tree map. All right. Category to detail, subcategory to detail. Quantity to size, category to color, subcategory to label, quantity to label. Change the mark type from square to circle. We now have a packed bubble chart. Great question. So there is two more visualizations that are good at showing the percent of total, the percent of whole, a pie chart and a donut chart. We'll get to those in a moment, but there's some background knowledge you need before we can get into those visualizations. All right, we're at another good stopping point for a break. I hope everyone again stays with us through the break. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. We'll get started again at 12:50 Central, so 1:50 if you're on Eastern time. So 12:50 Central in 2 to 3 minutes. We'll get started again. Please submit your questions during break if you have any. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. I had my mic still muted from the break. So to answer your question, Jeff. So Jeff had the question of why do some circles not have labels? The reason for that is there simply isn't enough room. And Tableau can't put the label there without that label overlapping on something else. So you can fix that. You can override that by going into Label and then select Allow Labels to Overlap. Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's going to look a little messy. So what's better is, and then on some visualization types, you can actually make the size bigger so there's more room for the label. But that doesn't exist with a packed bubble chart or a tree map or a pie chart. You can't make the size bigger, but some visualizations you can to give it more room. Excellent question, Jeffrey, and hopefully you all can still hear me. I think I have fixed that issue. Great. So Mary had the question is it possible to make a dot plot chart in Tableau to show a part of a whole? Yes, so dot plot is a really good visualization and that I didn't actually prepare for today, but I think of a dot plot as a variation on a bar chart. So what I can do here is I'm going to duplicate the bar chart and I'm going to turn this into a dot plot. So what a dot plot is instead of using a bar, you use a circle. And this is a dot plot. A lot of times I might also, I'm going to add subcategory over here, make this be a little bit bigger, and I'm going to take the labels off for now. So this is a dot plot. So what this shows is I have one dot for each subcategory in my data set, and I have one line for each of my categories. So a dot plot is good for showing distribution. It is not great at showing percent of whole. You can do part of a whole, percent of whole, but it's more for showing a distribution. So I can see that there's a larger range in values in office supplies within my subcategories, but it's more packed on the lower end. Also, I can go to the analytics pane and I can add what's called a box plot to help me see where the distribution lies. This is an advanced visualization. But actually my favorite visualization overall. So if you wanted to have this be percent of whole, what you would do is, I need to undo some of the stuff I did before, like we did with the label on the tree map, right click, go to quick table calculation, percent of total, and then you can see the percentage here for each of the dots. Excellent visualization. I will for sure add dot plot to the next time I do this training. It's actually a really, really common one, more common than some of the other ones that I did include. All right, so the next visualization type that we're going to talk about is a variation on a line chart, which we talked about before. So I'm actually going to duplicate our line chart visualization. And before we had this problem here where it was hard to really see our visualization when we wanted to have a line for furniture, office supplies, and technology. There is a variant of a line chart that's called a spark line, which is good to address this problem. So what a spark line is, and I'm going to take category off of colors here, and I'm going to change this to be continuous month, is it's just a unlabeled visualization that just shows trend. That will make sense in just a second. So what a spark line is you start with a line chart like we did before, add a trend line, and then what I'm going to do is add a dimension, in this case category, and I'm going to add it to rows. So I have a separate line for each of the categories, And the final things I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on some sales to hide the access and also hide the access for month. But I'm going to leave the label for furniture, office supplies, and technology. So a spark line is just a variant on a line chart that is specifically for showing trend and nothing else. So I remove the labels because I don't care about what date it happened in specifically. I don't care about the amount. I'm only interested in the trends and comparing trends between multiple categories. So we'll talk about dashboards at the end today, but when you add a spark line to a visualization, generally it is smaller and more compact, maybe not that compact. And then here I'll be able to say, oh, I have an upward trend in all of my categories. And actually, to make it be a little bit more interesting, we can do it with sales. And I can see I have a flat trend in one and a bigger up trend in technology and a less significant trend over here in office supplies. So to make a spark line, what you do is you start with a line chart. So let's do sales by a date, order date, and remember to get to continuous access, you right click on the date and go to the second section for continuous. Add a dimension to rows and then clean up by right clicking on what you want to hide, in this case month and sales access, and then add a trend line. This is a spark chart, a spark line. So it's a variant on a line chart. Technically, it's still a line chart, but the difference is you're only really showing trend. You hide the other information, and you usually have multiple spark lines that you compare with other spark lines. All right, let's create that. So we're going to go back into our practice, and I'll go a little bit slower so people can follow along. Add order date to columns. Right-click on order date and change to continuous month, which is in the second section. Add sales to rows. There's actually a typo here. This should say subcategory. Sorry about that. So if you're following along, I'll get the updated version out on our website afterwards. Add subcategory to rows and put it in front of sales. Remove the unneeded headers and axes. So I don't need sales and I don't need month. And I have spark lines here. But as I said before, generally a sparkline visualization won't look good until you add it to a dashboard, and we'll talk about dashboards at the end if we have enough time. And optionally, though usually, you can add a trend line. All right. Our next visualization type isn't actually a visualization type at all. What it is a combination of two visualization types, and it can be two different visualization types, most of which we've covered already. It is called a dual axis chart. You use a dual axis chart when you want to have two different types of marks on your visualization. And the example we will use today is one mark will be a bar and one mark will be a line. So because we are using date, we're going to start by bringing out order date and putting it on columns. And I'm going to change this to be continuous month. I'm going to add sales to rows. Nothing special here. This is actually the exact line chart that we saw before. Now, I want to add another measure, profit, to this visualization. And I want to create a new axis, which is where we get the name dual axis. So there's a couple different ways to do it, but I think the easiest way is to drag profit, and you drag it to the opposite side on your visualization than where sales is, and then release. You'll see a dotted line. And what that's going to do is add a brand new axis that we didn't have before. I'm going to hit Control Z and do that one more time. Drag your new measure, put it on the opposite side, and the two visual cues you have are that ruler icon and the dark dotted line. So we now have both measures in our visualization. What changed was on our marks card. We now have what's called an accordion on our marks card. We can make changes to all, meaning both of the measures in our visualization. If we click the next section, we can make changes to only sales. And if we click the next section, we can make changes to only profit. This is how we get different mark types. So I'm going to select sales here, and I'm going to change the mark type from automatic to bar. And then on profit, I'm going to make sure it always stays as a line. So I now have both visualization marks in my visualization, one for sales and one for profit. There's a couple things I need to do to make this be a little bit easier to read. The first is the axes are significantly different. So I'm going from about 0 to 120,000 on sales, but on profit, I'm going from negative 4,000 to 18,000. I want to synchronize these axes. So I'm going to right click on the second axis for profit and say synchronize. So now the scale is the same. Because the scale is the same, this second axis is redundant. I'm going to right click and deselect show header. The final thing I'm going to do is change the colors to make it be a little bit easier to read. I want, since the bars are in the back, I want those to be gray. So I'm going to click on Some Sales, which is the bar, go to Colors, and I'm going to choose a medium gray for sales. And then for color, I'm going to have that be orange. And I now personally think this is an easier visualization to read. All right, let's go through those steps one more time because there were quite a few steps on this visualization. So Mary asked the question, doesn't matter which one of these you sync on. I'll show you that as we go through. All right, so I'm going to add a date field to columns. It doesn't have to be a date field for dual access, but it's very commonly is a date. Change this to be a continuous month. Add my first measure to rows to create that line chart. Add my second measure and put it on my visualization, but on the opposite side of the existing axis. Your visual cue is the ruler and the dotted line. I'm going to re-show that axis because I got rid of it before. You now have the accordion. So I want sales. I want that to be bar. It's remembering the color changes I made before. And Mary's question is, does it matter which one you synchronize on? If it doesn't, it's going to exist on both. What does matter though is one of these is going to be on top of the other. So it's formatted correct here, but I just made it incorrect. So the one thing you do have to worry about is, can I see the marks? So right now the line chart is behind the bar. That's difficult to see. So one thing that does matter which one you click on is click on the one you want to bring to front and then say move that visualization to the front, and then you can hide either of the axes. What you should do though is once you are done hiding one, and if you're keeping one, right click on the existing one, go to edit axis, and you should probably change the label of the axis to be a label for both of the metrics in your visualization. Great question, Mary. All right, let's go to our practice problem. Practice dual access. I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, but we're going to go back into that order. Add order date to columns. Right-click on order date and can change it to be a continuous month. Add sales to rows. Add profit to the opposite side of sales. You now have the accordion. Right-click on the profit axis and say synchronize. You could actually stop here if you'd like. This is fine with 2 line charts. But I'm going to go in to sales and change this to be, sales. Make sure you're on the right one. Don't make that mistake that I did. And change that to be a bar. All right. So we have a couple visualization types left. We have 3 more visualization types left today. So what are these visualization types? We are finally ready to do a pie chart. So we're going back to percent of whole. The reason I saved this till now is there's a variant of a pie chart, which is called a donut chart, which is a type of dual axis chart. So we had to learn about dual axis charts first before we could do pie and donuts. All right, so it's likely that everyone is familiar with pie charts and what they represent. They are probably the most overused visualization and most inappropriately used visualization that I can think of. Be very, very careful about when you use a pie chart. My general recommendation is use a pie chart when you are comparing 2 or 3 things. Once you get to 4 or 5 things, it tends to get really hard to read. So think of things like maybe you are comparing male versus female, or in this data set, which I'll show you in a second, segment. There are 3 segment values here. So don't use a bar chart, a packed bubble, a tree map if you have more than 3 things you want to compare the proportion of. But pie charts are fine for comparing 2 or 3 things. So the first thing we need to do for a pie chart is we need to change our mark type to be pie. This is the only visualization that it's essential that we change the mark type to begin with. This is because the mark type of pie has this special option on the mark card that doesn't exist for other visualizations, which is an angle. And we need an angle to make a pie chart. So I said I want to show the percent for segment. I can add segment to color, and now we already have a pie chart. It's not an interesting or accurate pie chart because it's doing 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for each of the 3 segments in my visualization. To get the right proportion, you have to add a measure to angle. And now I have an accurate pie chart. I'll go through those steps again. Change the mark type to be pie. Add segment or a dimension to color. Add a measure to angle. And you have a pie chart. Let's do some labeling. I'm going to add segment to label. I'm also going to add sum of sales to label. And like we did with the tree map, I'm going to right-click on sum of sales and switch the quick table calculation to be percent of total and then add another copy of sum of sales without that quick table calculation. So I can now see the label, the percentage, and the total value. A common question that I get is, can you move where the label is for a pie chart? Yes, you can, but you shouldn't do it. So I can move it wherever I want, but if my data updates and the pie resizes, now my label is always going to be here, and that might not make sense. All right, let's create the pie chart in our example. I believe it's the exact same example here. So change our mark type to pie. Add your dimension, in this case segment, to color. I'm going to change the view to make it easier for you to see. Add sales to size. Add segment to label. Add sales to label. And then right-click on the label sales. Go to quick table calculation and say % of total. All right, let's create what's called a donut chart. So if you're not familiar with the donut chart, it's one of the trendy charts right now, and some other visualization tools that Tableau competes with use a donut chart as the default instead of a pie chart. There actually isn't a dedicated chart type of donut in Tableau. So this is kind of where we have to get a little bit hacky in order to create a donut chart. Oh, so I got the question of saying, how do you revert your move after you have moved the mark? So that's a great question. So what I did was I moved the consumer label, and then I just hit Control Z on my keyboard. So you can do Control Z to undo most, but not all things in Tableau. Great question. All right, so let's make a pie chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate an existing pie chart because the first couple steps are exactly the same. So what we need to do here is we need to have two mark types. We need to have a mark type that's just a circle and a mark type that's the pie chart that we have here. Remember, when you want two mark types in the same visualization, you need to use a dual axis chart. The thing is, on the example that we had before with a dual axis chart, we had measures on rows and columns. Well, actually on just rows. We had two measures on rows. A pie chart, by default, doesn't have anything on measures. So we need to kind of fake it. We need to give Tableau something that we can synchronize and change, and have our accordion where we can change the different marks. So over here on the left, we have this field that's called number of records. This is a Tableau generated field, and all it is the number 1. It gives the number 1 for every single record in our data set. We usually use number of records to count the number of rows in our data set, but we can use this for a special reason. If I add this to rows, and the things will break before they make sense again, it adds an axis over here. But if I right-click on it and change it from some number of records, which is showing the count, I can change this to be average. If you change something to be average, if it's number of records, the average of 1, no matter how many ones I have, is always going to be the number 1. So I can see that the pie chart is right on the 1 value here in my visualization. I'm going to make another copy of that and add another sum of records to rows. And again, change the measure type to be an average. So why did I do this? I did this really hacky thing just to get the accordion over here on the left. So on this second one, I don't want to change everything. On the second one, I'm going to leave things as is, as a pie chart with all of this information. But on the third one, I'm going to change this from a pie chart to a circle. And I'm going to get rid of everything on the marks card because I don't need it. And then I'm going to change the color to be white and the size to be smaller than it was before. So why did I do that? Well, I did that because now I can right click on the axis and select dual axis like we did before. So we didn't do that before. Before we dragged out our new field, a secondary way to make a dual axis chart is to just right click on one of the axes and just say dual axis. So we want this new white circle to be right in the center. So I can right click on the axis like we did before and say synchronize. We now have a nice donut chart. But there's a couple additional formatting things I want to do. These axes don't actually make sense, so I will need to right click on them and deselect show header. Oh, actually, I'm going to hit Control Z. There's one thing I need to do first. Right click on one of the axes, go to edit axis and deselect include 0. What this is going to do is it's going to center the visualization because we don't have an axis going from 0 to 1. Now I can right click, deselect show header, and now the final thing I need to do, like we've seen before, is just format to get rid of these lines that I really don't like. There's actually 2 lines on top of each other. There's a grid line and a 0 line. And the final thing that I can do is I can resize the visualizations. So I'm going to resize the pie to be bigger, and then resize the circle to be bigger as well, but not as big as the pie. That is how you make a donut chart. So yes, this is the most complicated visual we'll talk about today. And I'll go through how to do this again in just a second. The reason I like to show this in the introductory course is because there is near infinite visualizations that you can make in Tableau by just combining all of the basic elements that we saw. So this is a combination of really a dot plot, a pie chart, and a dual axis chart is what you need to do in order to get a pie chart. So let's go through those steps again because there's quite a lot. Start with a pie chart, and I'm going to duplicate an existing pie chart. I'm going to add number of records, 2 copies of it actually, to rows. On both of them, I'm going to change the mark type to be, the aggregation type to be average. I now have the accordion on the left. On the second selection, I'm going to change the mark type from pie to be circle and get rid of all of the extra stuff that I don't need, but keep it on the pie chart. I'm now going to change the color to be white and the size to be slightly smaller on the circle. I'm going to right click on the second axis, you could do it on the first, and select dual axis. Right click on the axis again, select synchronize axis. Right click on the axis again, go to edit axis and deselect include 0. Now I can right click on both of the axes and deselect show header to hide them. On my pie chart, I can make it be a little bit bigger and also make the circle, white circle, be a little bit bigger too, but not as big as the pie. Right click on the white space to format and get rid of the extra 0 lines and grid lines. And that is how you make a donut chart in Tableau. All right, one more visualization type today before we start talking quickly about dashboards. So the final visualization type really isn't a visual. It is called a KPI. It really is just a written number, but it is an important visual that we should all know how to make. So I want to make a visualization that is just the total amount of sales with a nice label that says sales. This is actually probably the simplest visualization we'll make today, but it's actually not as commonly used as you would hope. So I'm going to take sales, and all I'm going to do is add it to text. Believe it or not, this is a KPI. It just shows a total value or a metric. It doesn't have to be a total value, it could be a subset. But to make this be a good KPI, I need to do some formatting. So I'm going to go and click on text and hit the ellipses. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a label that says total sales. I am going to underline that. And then I'm going to make the sales values be significantly larger, and then change the alignment to be centered. Now, when I add this to a dashboard, this will look really nice in the end. It looks a little out of place just as a single visualization, but this will look nice in the end. Let me do that one more time. And then Mary, I did see your question. I'll get back to that in just a second. All right, so add sales or any of your metrics, a metric to text. Click on text, go to the ellipses, add a nice label, format it. I am going to just underline sales, and then I'm going to make the value be bigger, and then change the alignment to be centered. So what this will look like on a dashboard is generally you would have multiple KPIs. Get rid of that title. You just have a nice little indicator. They'd go across the top. Maybe it'd have one for sales, one for profit, and so on. That is a KPI. All right, Mary did have a question. If I wanted to make, for example, 2 pie charts next to each other, can I make it that in one worksheet, or would that be a dashboard thing? That's an excellent question. Let's see. So let's go back to our pie chart example. Oh, sorry, our donut chart example. No, pie chart. It would work for either. If you want to make multiple pie charts, all you have to do is add a dimension to rows or columns. And if you add it to rows, they'll go from top to bottom. If you add it to columns, it'll go from left to right. Jeff said, what do we need to talk to start a petition for an automatic donut chart? That's a funny question, but that is actually a really good question, because there is a place on Tableau's website for requesting specific enhancements. Normally, if something like this comes up in a training, I would just have everyone go there and just either vote on an existing enhancement or enter it, because I think that's a good learning experience. Thing is, with the donut chart, that specific request to make it be a standard visualization has been on there since I started using Tableau 8 years ago. And it's probably a top 5 request, and for whatever reason, Tableau's just ignoring it. I think it's partly because of politics. There's other visualization tools that compete with Tableau that prefer donut charts over pie charts, and I think that they just don't want to give in to that peer pressure for weird reasons. But that's just conjecture from me. Excellent questions. I'm going to pause here again for some quick questions before we get into our final topic today, which is basic dashboarding. Now, what a dashboard is just a collection of visualizations, generally, and they should be related to each other, that we can add to really give context and really create a report that we can share with other people. Now, like I said with maps and like I said with data preparation, I could spend an entire 3 hours on teaching you how to create and optimize a dashboard. I'm not going to do that today. We will have future trainings, and we have our online data coach training platform that will cover in detail how to create dashboards. And I recommend that everyone goes out and looks at those as potential options. But I do want to teach you the basics today. And I'm going to assume that you've never made a dashboard before. So in our visualization, what we're going in our workbook, we've been clicking this first plus icon to create a new viz. The second plus icon is to create a dashboard. And I went here quickly 2 or 3 times already. But over on the left, you can specify the size of your dashboard. You can bring out the sheets you'd like to use, and then you can bring out additional objects. We won't talk about detailed objects today. So what I want everyone to do as a practice is add a couple of the visualizations that you made today and create a dashboard. So to add a sheet, I'm going to drag out my first visualization, and I'm going to get a gray area showing it's going to take up the entire view. When I take out my second item, it will tile it, so I can say, oh, I want it to be the left half, the right half, the top half, or the bottom half. And then finally, I can do the same thing with a third visualization. I guess I will show one additional object you can add is go to dashboard at the top, show a title, and I can say sales, and I can say, open up a new window, here it is, sales and profit dashboard. And now I have a nice little dashboard that shows all of the cool, well, not all, a good chunk of the cool visualizations that I have made. One thing that's really cool about visualizations is if you click on one of the visuals, so clicked on the map here, and I'm going to click here on filter, and I can now use this visualization as a filter. So I'm going to lasso half of the country at the top, and if you didn't see, the bottom 2 visualizations updated to just show the selected marks. Bottom, top, nice interactivity. There is a lot of advanced interactivity that you can do. You can do filters, parameters, actions. This is an action I just saw. Sets, set actions, parameter actions. There are so many different things you can do to create context and interactivity, and we will not get into it today, but the dashboards are really, really powerful. All right, I got a good question come in saying, what do you use containers for? That's a great question. So what I'm going to do before I show how you use containers is I'm going to go back to our KPI visualization, and I'm going to duplicate it twice. And I'm going to make 3 KPI visualizations. KPI sales, KPI profit, and KPI, let's do quantity. So I'm going to keep sales as is. For profit, I'm going to replace sales with profit, format this to be a currency, edit the label, hit OK, and do the same thing with quantity, though this is not a dollar amount, so I will not change the formatting, but I will change the label. Okay, this is just some background stuff that I wanted to do. So the question was, what do you use containers for? So I'm going to create a new dashboard, and there's an object type down here, which is a horizontal container, which is just labeled horizontal, and a vertical container. A container is used to group visualizations and other objects together. So I'm going to bring out a horizontal container, and containers have a blue outline around them. And to show you how you would use this is I'm going to put my sales KPI into the container, my profit KPI into the container, and my quantity KPI into the container. Do some quick formatting options, hide some titles, and then this is really what you use a container for. Is now I have a container with my 3 KPIs, and I can use this like any other object, but now I'm going to bring in my other visualizations, and I can add them to my view. So now I have my map here. I'm going to put my KPIs at the top. I'm going to resize so they're up there. And then, like I did before, tree map at the bottom. And this time let's add dual access at the bottom. That is how you would use containers. So now if I want to move my KPIs, I can move them all together. Great question. All right, we are actually wrapping up about 27 minutes early. I will stay on as long as we have questions. So there might be just an awkward gap until we get questions. A couple final things I want to show. If you're new to Tableau, and I shared this link at the beginning, the Tableau public site is absolutely amazing. It's where you can download the free version of Tableau, but you can also see the great things that the community is making. So there's some featured artists out here, including some featured artists who are on the tessellation team from time to time are showed under featured artist. But you can go to the gallery, you can see some really cool visualizations that the community is making, visualizations of the day, and you can also search for people. So being a little self-promoting, I'm going to go to my page. This is my page, that's my face. And you can see some of the visualizations that I've shared. My most recent visualization being one that walks through making understanding dice probability and walking through the basic statistics of that. So excellent resource that you can go to for great content. Some authors that I recommend you following. I would love to have more followers, but I'm not the most prolific person out there. A great person to follow would be Luke Stanky. He is a Tableau Zen master, who's one of the other co-founders here at Data Coach. He has some really amazing visualizations out there. Another good person to follow would be Spencer Blocky, another person on our team. He is really into sports visualizations. Another great person to follow out on Tableau Public. All right, I had a couple questions come in while I went through that Tableau Public spiel. Can you apply different filters for the same dashboard? Yes, something we didn't talk about today. But to show you how that works, so we have the filters card, which we really didn't use, but I'm going to add region to the filters card. And I can filter by the regions that exist in my visualization. And then I can show this filter on this page. Do some formatting. Again, I'm not getting into all the details on purpose. But now I can see all of the regions, go to the central region, the east region, the south region, and then the west region. Awesome. This filter only exists for this map right now. If the filter had already been out there when I started, here I am. if that filter had already been out there when I started, it would have automatically added the filter here. But since I added this late, I can go into the map and I can go to filters, and then I can select that region filter here. I do have to redo that same formatting. All right, I can get rid of these keys. I don't like these keys. All right, so now, like I said before, the filter only applies to the visualization was started on. But I can go onto the filter itself, go to the caret drop down, and I can say apply to worksheets, and I have some options, all using related data sources. So that would be any data source that has a region field. I only have one data source here. All the data source, all the visualizations using this data source, select individual worksheets or just this worksheet. I'm going to say all using this data source. So now when I use this filter, you can see all 3 visualizations updating. And what happened behind the scenes was it added that filter to all of my visualizations, and the cylinder icon means it's on all within this data source. Excellent question. The next question from Mary is, can I make a square dot plot chart like the one that has 100 dots equaling 100%, 10 per row, and then the dots colored according to the percentage of whole? Sounds like you have a very specific use case, Mary. The answer is yes. You would be able to do that, but you would have to do something that I won't be able to do it right now because there's some changes you'd have to do to the data set behind the scenes. You would have to have a data set that would indicate what row and what column each of those squares would be in. So if we had that data set, which would be a simple data set that really would just be rows and columns numbers, you would be able to do what you're talking about. But I won't be able to demo it today. I don't have the data readily available. But that sounds like a really cool use case. All right. Well, I'll stay on for just a moment longer, but I really do appreciate everyone's time today. I really enjoy doing these. Unless any last second questions come in, again, we really appreciate likes and subscriptions to our channel. We're a new channel. We started at the beginning of this year in January. We really enjoy what we're doing here, and I really hope everyone stays safe and has an excellent weekend. Thanks, everyone. Oh, a couple good questions just came in. So Jeffrey just asked, is there a way to share a dashboard with someone who doesn't have Tableau? Let me return the share back on. Just give me a sec, and I can go through that question. And I know there's a delay, so hopefully you'll. All right. So Jeffrey, if you're still on, how you would do that is to share. The best way to share within a larger organization would be if you have a product called Tableau Server. So you can go into Tableau Server, you can sign in. I'm not signed in right now, and you can share from here, and you can share a dashboard. So your company wouldn't have to have everyone in your company wouldn't have to have Tableau Desktop to view the visualizations then, but they would be able to go into a company's instance of Tableau Server in order to see that visualization. Now, the product that I showed, Tableau Public, and I'm just going to go into one of Spencer's visualizations here. This is a Tableau server. This is a publicly accessible Tableau server. What this would allow you to do is you can share any dashboard for free just by signing up for an account here. The thing though is when I say Tableau public, this really is public, meaning that everyone in the world will be able to see it. So only do that for things that are not protected, not company specific. The final thing you can do if you have Tableau is, and this is not recommended, this is only in a scenario where you have no other options, is you can export dashboards and visualizations as PDFs or as images. All right. Anish asked, will this video upload be available after the stream? Yes, it will be available. I don't know how soon after the stream, but it will be available. All right. Thanks again. I really appreciate everyone's time today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please follow us on Twitter. And then follow me personally on Twitter. My handle is abracadata89. And then please keep an eye out on our Data Coach website for upcoming trainings. And then if this is something you think would be a good fit within your company, we do deploy our Data Coach product in our trainings at an enterprise level. And we would love to talk to you all in the future about how we can integrate in your systems. All right. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great weekend. Bye. I keep seeing questions come in. Sir P, you have the question of why is the exclude level of detail not preferred and how does it impact performance? Can I explain? Yeah, so out of context for kind of basic visualizations, but that is a great question. And it's something that I've had to look in personally myself. When you use an exclude versus a fixed versus an overall LOD, and if anyone else is on, I realize this is going to be completely out of context. But when you do an LOD, there's actually an order of operations that happens. Exclude LODs happen later. Exclude LODs are generally used in conjunction with a context filter. So it's not so much that you're worried about performance, it is that you're worried about getting the correct information to get returned back with in conjunction with your context filters. So that's why a fixed calculation tends to be used more often than an exclude or even an include, though include's a little bit different. Now, why performance comes into play just has to do with how many steps Tableau does. If you have an exclude or an include LOD, that's actually adding another step to the processing that wasn't there before. And that could add additional querying time to your workflow overall if you didn't need that step. So it's not really that individual step takes a long time. It just can be adding an additional step that wasn't there before, which could add a little bit more time to your processing. As kind of a general rule, level of detail calculations are slow to begin with. So there's a lot of arguments in the community about what's the best way of doing it. But with having a data prep background like I do, a lot of times I just change my underlying data source so I can avoid using an LOD expression because I'll get better performance just not using any LOD. All right, hopefully you were still on. Again, I know that's out of context for probably almost everyone else, but I really enjoyed this training today, and I hope to see everyone again sometime in some way, shape, or form.